The US-Israeli military campaign against Iran has opened a new and highly volatile phase in Middle Eastern geopolitics. What began as a military confrontation is now reshaping regional balances, testing diplomatic channels and raising tensions across the Gulf, and generating global concerns over energy security, maritime routes, and economic security. For the countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council, this is not a distant crisis. The Gulf has found itself on the front line of a conflict it neither sought nor wanted. While regional actors are now trying to prevent further escalation and preserve what remains of a fragile regional order. To discuss this, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Majed Al Ansari, advisor to the Prime Minister and official spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar, as well as president of the Center of International Policy Research. Dr. Al Ansari, thank you very much for being here with us today. Let's go straight to the first question I would like to ask you. From a GCC and a Qatari perspective, this war in the region, this war is a war that the region did not choose, but the Gulf now finds itself on the front line of the war going on between the United States, Israel, and Iran. So how would you assess the current and the upcoming strategic reality of the Gulf today, and what do you make of the current negotiations that are ongoing during these weeks and days?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm glad to be here doing this podcast again. It's always a pleasure to be here in Milan, in ISPI, and with you on this podcast. Let me say that I think there are a number of strategic shifts that has happened as a result of this crisis. One is there's a strategic change in the threat perception and the operations that are linked to this threat perception in the region. In all the crises that we have had in our region, geopolitical crises, whether it be the Iraqi-Irani war, the invasion of Kuwait, the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the consequent crises that we have seen in the region, the Strait of Hormuz was never closed. This weaponization of economy in this way is a very dangerous precedent, and we are running the danger right now of this becoming the new status quo. Whenever there's a danger, there is an active weaponization of economy in this way, because the pressure is not on the countries on the other side of the Gulf. The pressure is on the international economy as a whole. The effects of the economic pressure that is happening as a result of closing down the Strait of Hormuz is you have around 20% of the international LNG capacity is being hijacked. You have 35% of helium, which is very important for everything, including the phone that people will be seeing as a result of this podcast. We'll be seeing the podcast on. These phones are affected by this stopping of helium going through the strait. 10% of urea. We're talking about fertilizer. Countries like India have already seen the effects of this. It's an effect that goes to international food security, international industry, and international economy. The electricity prices, the energy prices all around the world are increasing. So there's a big danger in this weaponization of economy. We've seen that happen before in the war in Ukraine, and it's happening again now in this war. The other, and that is equally and similarly important, is the fact that there is a change of the rules of engagement with Iran. Iran has never officially attacked the Gulf through its military capacity. It has used its proxies in the region. We've seen that during the Iraq-Irani war, like the attempt on the life of the then Emir of Kuwait. We've seen the attacks in Aramco and on the airport in Abu Dhabi, but never has Iran officially in its military capacity in a war targeted the Gulf in this way. So it's a complete change of the rules of engagement. And then there is a change also in the security architecture in the region that was based on the U.S. deterrence. The U.S. deterrence is no longer viable in stopping attacks against our countries, as we have seen, although the strategic alliance with the United States is growing. The security architecture that is based around this U.S. deterrence has shown that it's not enough, and it needs a new doctrine around the region. And finally, the fact that our region is facing right now a war that it didn't choose means that we have to retake our agency when it comes to solving regional conflict. We can no longer accept that extra-regional parties would come into the region to instigate war or to instigate peace. The problems of the region have to be solved by the countries of the region, which means we have to take an active role in our hard security, an active role in defending ourselves, but also an active role in finding the economic synergies, the economic partnerships, and the economic models in the region that would act as stopgaps to future conflict, and to find a way of getting to solutions and deals in the conflicts that are taking place right now that are sustainable and go past the freezing conflict, as a lot of the conflicts that are now in the region are frozen as a result of these deals. But we need to go beyond that to sustainable, comprehensive deals for peace and security in our region.
And so, speaking of the region, how would you assess the impact of this war on the Gulf region and the GCC at this moment? And also with external allies, if we may.
The first impact is an economic impact. The economic impact here is much wider than is reported right now. Let me give you one example. When it comes to the LNG capacity, production capacity in Qatar, the attacks that have targeted Ras Laffan and has taken 2 trains out of operation in Ras Laffan. The trains are basically the factories that move natural gas to being liquefied natural gas and make it ready for export, has diminished our capacity to produce by 17%. The annual loss of revenue is around 20 billion. And you have around 26 billion the cost of repairing the trains that were attacked. This is only the LNG. If you look at the overall number, it's 126 billion over 5 years, which is roughly the GDP of a country like Luxembourg. This is the loss of one sector in one country in the GCC. You look at aviation. One of the largest airlines in the world is Qatar Airways, and by the way, the biggest cargo company in the world is Qatar Airways. It halted operations for the war. It is only now back up to 60-70% operation. And if you look at the other industries, if you look at our international investments, a lot of that will have to be curtailed as a result of this war. So the first impact is that economic impact. The second impact has to do with the sense of security in our region. Our countries have always enjoyed being an oasis of stability in a very turbulent neighborhood. Well, that is put into question today with the fact that my children, I have 5 daughters ranging between 8 and 17 years. I had to sit down and explain to them why our country was being attacked, why they were hearing explosions every day for the span of the conflict, why the alerts were coming to their phones and they had to shelter, why they couldn't go to school. The level of this loss of sense of safety and security is irreplaceable for a generation that lived through this conflict. And the third thing, which I think is third impact, which I think is also very important, has to do with our understanding of our alliances internationally. And it's not all negative, to be honest, because the result of what's happening right now is not that we need to end our international alliances and international security arrangement that we have had in the region for so many years now. If you look at the relationship with the United States, for example, and the security hedging with the United States, it didn't come out of theorizing security architecture for the region. It came out of necessity in 1979 after the Iranian Revolution and the beginning of the Iraqi-Irani war, and then the invasion of Kuwait by the Iraq and the help that the United States had given to the Gulf in freeing Kuwait, and then, of course, with the U.S. presence in the region militarily and so many bases after that. So it's a relationship that grew. And when we decided to increase our defensive capabilities, weapons acquisitions, training, support from the United States, and the strategic relationship with the United States was very important, but also with Europe. We have seen now, especially in this crisis, how the mutual defense agreements that were signed with countries like the UK and France, the defense partnerships with countries like Italy and Sweden and Germany and others have been very beneficial in making sure that we are able to defend our countries. And I have to say here that Europe stepped up to the plate and showed itself as a reliable partner collectively and individually during this crisis. European leaders were flooding into the Gulf, showing solidarity. The positions were very clear against the attacks on the Gulf. Europe is leading an effort now to find a sustainable solution for the Strait of Hormuz issue. And this means that coming out of this crisis, one of the biggest realizations is how important Europe is as a partner. And I think in Europe also, there is a realization of how important the GCC is for European energy security, for European economies, as a result of seeing what has happened when our economies were affected and the ripple effects in Europe. So the synergy between Europe and the region is very important coming out of this. And I think it's the biggest impact, the positive impact of this war is increasing that partnership and finding new ways of making it, solidifying the security of Europe and the GCC through this partnership.
And so at the time of speaking, we see negotiation ongoing for a possible deal between the United States and Iran. And but you warned against the risk of freezing such a conflict. But where do you see this crisis right now heading? Towards a phase of more controlled confrontation, or rather, is there still a real true risk of escalation in this situation?
Of course, there is a risk of escalation if a deal is not reached immediately. There's always a stray bullet scenario where any escalation from either side could result in a resumption of hostilities in a way that would affect all of us in the region. But an even worse scenario would be a situation of no war, no peace, with reduced cost on both parties, while the Strait of Hormuz remains closed and both sides have their hands on the trigger, and the security and the prosperity that we enjoy in the Gulf is affected strategically. Until now, the Gulf was planning for different contingencies, a 3-month crisis, 6-month crisis, 1-year crisis, and every scenario, the scenario keeps getting worse as time goes by. And what we are seeing right now, of course, is that there is a chance for a deal, that there is, because the ceasefire is still holding, actually, this gives us a good indication that both parties want an end to this war. But there's a narrative issue when it comes to finding a deal. We are supportive of the efforts of our brothers in Pakistan in leading this mediation. We are coordinating with all our partners in the region to make sure that there is a positive outcome, but the situation is still very dangerous. And as I said, if there is a return to escalation, this is, of course, a very dangerous scenario. But a no war, no peace scenario is also very dangerous for international economy and for our region.
And so do you actually see for a final question, the spaces of diplomacy still open on the long term, or is this pressure on diplomacy and on actors trying to engage into diplomacy, including Qatar and Oman and the European Union to some extent, is this shrinking, or is the way still trying, to build a context where diplomacy can work?
Of course, as a result of this war, there is a serious erosion of trust in our region. Trust in each other, trust in external powers that have an effect on the region, trust in the process itself. But there is still a very strong belief in our region that diplomacy is the only way forward. Even months before this crisis started, we were all collectively attempting a rapprochement with Iran. The Iranian president was in Doha meeting with the GCC ministers a year ago. And the discussion was, how can Iran and the GCC live next to each other in a way that would help all the peoples of the region reach their aspirations, whether it be the people of Iran or the people of the GCC. The Gulf believes in this process, has always believed in this process at the darkest times. You have to remember, for a country like Qatar, for example, our relationship with Iran was always turbulent. We were supportive of the people of Syria when they wanted their freedom. We were supportive of the stability in Iraq and the independence of Iraq. We were supportive of the central government, the legitimate government in Yemen. We have our differences with Iran, but we've always believed that we can develop a working relationship with Iran. We have helped mediate between Iran and international powers. We have always had a good working relationship with them, although we had these very big differences with them, where Qatar was on the other side of these conflicts, actively supporting those who were trying to defend themselves against aggression that was at many times supported by Iran. the problem right now, I think, coming out of this crisis, is there is this attack on the concept of peace. That the only way forward is for everybody to act on their own national interest, and for regional hegemons to be allowed to exercise their power, and for a power-based international order rather than a rule-based international order. This is a reality that nobody wants to live in. Regardless of the narrative you hear, regardless of the very loud populist voices you hear that are cheering escalation, nobody wants to live in a world where peace is not the reality of that world. Nobody wants to live in a world where war is how you live your everyday life. Nobody wants to go back to the way the world was run before the Second World War. Everybody wants to live in peace, for sure. And therefore, regardless of what you hear, regardless of the rhetoric, regardless of the political agendas, we have to all work together to make sure that there is always a chance for diplomacy, that mediators are protected, that mediation is a process that people believe in, and that the international community as a whole pressures the parties of every conflict to reach a deal on the negotiation table. At the end of every conflict, there is a negotiation table. Even at the end of World War II, there was a negotiation table. The sooner we get to that table, the less losses the war will present. And we will get to that table. Delaying getting to that table will mean deals will be harder to get to. People will die. Economies will be irreparably affected. And the chance for generations to live in peace will be squandered. We're looking at the situation in Gaza right now. We're looking at the situation in Syria. We're looking at the situation across our region. And we are seeing generations lost as a result of war. We don't want to see that happening in other places. We want to help export the peace and prosperity that we have found in the Gulf to the world. And we want the world to help us do that.
Well, let's hope that we get to the table quite soon. So, Dr. Majed Al Ansari, thank you very much for joining us in this Med Insights podcast here in Milan. And till the next time.
Till next time. Thank you very much for having me.